So welcome to the Research Mentor Academy webinar number 4. This webinar is put together by Radiology Research Alliance and Razor, and it's supported by a small venture fund grant that we received from the AUR R&E Foundation. My name is Leon Lenschik, and I'm currently serving as president of the RRA, and I have some mentoring experience at Wake Forest, both within radiology and outside. Joining me as for other sessions is Georgianne McGinnis from NYU. She also has quite a bit of experience mentoring both within and outside of radiology. This is the 4th and last webinar. The other 3 are archived on the RRA website. Today we're going to try to tie everything together and start thinking about how you articulate your overall mentoring philosophy. For those of you who enjoyed prior webinars, you may want to join us in person at the Mentor Academy workshop at the AUR annual meeting in Orlando. We will have 2 sessions lasting 2 hours each, and we require that participants attend both sessions. This will be limited to 12 participants, and if you're interested in attending, just send me an email and I will include you on the list. The goals of this webinar, as has been for others, is to focus on the mentor side of the mentor-mentee relationship, emphasize practical strategies to help mentors, and most importantly, encourage personal reflection on the mentoring process. So as you listen to this webinar and as you go back to listen to others, ask yourself what you've learned, ask yourself what it means to you, and most importantly, ask yourself what you're going to do differently when you mentor next time. These webinars were put together based on what we think are best practices from the Wake Forest CTSI Mentor Academy, from the National Research Mentoring Network, and from the NYU School of Medicine various mentoring programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Georgianne to give us the plan for today and to get us started on the discussion. Georgianne.
So hello, everybody. Next slide, please. So it's important as you develop as a mentor that you are thoughtful and self-reflective in developing your mentoring philosophy and in overcoming challenges. While you're mentoring in the background, you should always be considering the roles that mentors play in the overall development professionally of their mentees. And while you do, you can be developing a strategy for guiding the professional development of your mentees. And many times this is facilitated and aided by using a written document. And we're going to talk about that more in this hour. Also importantly is impregnated in your mentoring relationship is that you have periodic conversations with your mentees, not just on the science, but on their professional goals, on their career development objectives, and what strategies the 2 of you can do together to advance them on their goals. While you're doing this, both of you should be reflecting on the mentor training experience, and you should be thinking and reflecting on any intended behavioral or philosophical changes across the mentoring competencies that you can effect that would actually enhance your abilities as a mentor. And you could articulate this into an approach for working with future mentees, because you're going to be, with each experience as a mentor, you're going to get better and better at the process. Next, please. So part of your role as the mentor of a researcher is, as I said, not just in the science, but in their professional development beyond the research. Next, please. So these areas in which you can and should have impact and influence include scientific development. That's obvious. So that's going to be the experimental design and honing skills in scientific technique and writing successful IRB submissions or grant applications and securing funding, learning how to do good scientific writing, research ethics, and the multitasking that is really critical to being an effective and efficient researcher. But it's also, as you develop your junior faculty as a researcher, recognize that the end goal, the long-term goal, is that they're going to be independent of you, and they are going to be an independent PI running their own lab. So some of this is development in this arena, which would include lab management skills, managing staff, recruitment and retention of staff and faculty and students, effective mentorship of all of these groups, including the staff. Professional development would include networking, developing skills in public speaking. At the end of the day, a successful researcher has to get their ideas and their accomplishments and their results out there, and that includes not just publications, but also podium presentations, chalk talks, grand rounds, and so forth. Public speaking skills are critical, no matter how good the science is. And for long-term productivity, work-life balance cannot be ignored. Burnout is a very consequential and threatening aspect of all of our careers, and we need to pay attention to that. Leadership skills, as these individuals develop as independent scientists, include role modeling, career guidance, oversight and training of junior colleagues, and once again, time management is an overarching skill. Next, please. So our core belief. The ultimate goal of most mentoring relationships is to enable the mentee to achieve success and academic outcomes after the mentoring period has been completed. In research mentoring, there are many career objectives that have to be considered, and some of them are disparate and diverge from the science. Non-research professional development activities are sometimes seen as trivial or the distractions from the research, but in fact, they're critically important to the mentee's long-term career objectives. They're never going to be successful as an independent scientist if you don't help them develop all of these different skills. Next, please. So towards that end, as we mentioned, it's really important that built into the mentoring program and the process and the calendar over the course of the year is that you have periodic conversations with your mentees on their professional goals. You do assessments of their career development objectives, and you periodically do the gap analysis so you can develop strategies to get them to the next stage and ultimately to the stages in the far future. Next, please. One of the ways that this can be effective is to develop an individual development plan, an IDP. And this idea of an IDP should be introduced to the mentee early on, even if it isn't enacted right away. But a completed plan can be very useful to advance the mentor-mentee relationship and to make it more efficient and more effective. The plan should guide the conversations around the mentee's professional development needs and expectations, and to remind the mentee that most training grants, like most K grants, require an IDP. So the idea of utilizing an IDP is one that is widespread in the field of science, and it's very valuable. Adopting a formal IDP and asking the mentee to complete it and adjust it and update it annually at a minimum is a very effective way to not lose sight of what the professional career goals are in addition to the research itself. And we're going to talk about some models for IDPs later on in this session. So these plans can be used as part of an expectations document, if you will, to initiate these discussions, these very important discussions on goals and expectations. These can also be used as sort of a compact in conjunction with the IDP to tailor expectations for specific mentees. And these further enhancing and making effective communication skills are really essential for counseling mentees who are not achieving milestones. It's a concrete document that you can look at together with milestones spelled out. It's a way for everybody to understand and see what is and isn't being achieved. Next, please. So we're going to move to some cases that are very thought-provoking, and we hope that this will stimulate conversation. So the first case is entitled, "To Be or Not to Be a PI." You're the mentor, and you're mentoring two junior researchers, and they're both very talented and hardworking, and they're doing good work. One has made it clear that his career goals do not include becoming a PI. The second is determined that her career goals are to become a PI. Lately, you find yourself spending more time giving professional development advice to the researcher intending to become a PI. In your self-reflection, you rationalize this by saying to yourself, well, this is what I'm more familiar with. This career path mirrors my own, and thus I have more to offer this mentee. However, in all honesty, you're worried that you're writing off the other researcher given his lower enthusiasm for becoming an independent investigator. So the questions that I want to open to the group, and we will open the phone lines, are what value judgments are you, and should you, be making as a mentor? How might non-research interests play into a mentee's decision of their career path? And how might the mentor draw these factors out in a discussion with the mentee? So we're going to open the phone lines and hope we hear from you.
So I'm happy to start the discussion. One thing as a mentor would be to delve into what these two junior researchers think a PI's role entails and a PI career track entails. It could be that this junior researcher that's made it clear that he does not want to become a PI doesn't realize that you could have a work-life balance as a PI that's grant-funded, and understanding what judgments he's made in terms of the career path. And the same goes for the junior investigator that is committed to becoming a PI, making sure that she realizes what that role entails in terms of grant funding, in terms of work-life balance, and getting to understand their non-research interests and how that might play into their decisions for what they want in the future.
Yes. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think that was a great point. The other thing I would add is, in situations like this, we really tend to gravitate and maybe even favor people who are like us. And the analogy that I'd like to use is, those of us who work in academic radiology, we have trainees every year. Some of them we know will stay in academics, whereas others we know will go into private practice. And the tendency, at least for me, is to somehow, find more common ground with the future academicians, because that's where my whole career has been. And it really requires kind of almost a conscious effort to say that, if you're going to accept this role as a teacher, you may have to adjust your teaching style to various types of trainees, but you really can't play favorites. And I think this case, approaches that subject a little bit as well, that when we mentor people, we need to give them space to create their own careers, even if those careers are not necessarily identical to ours.
Good points. And sometimes the reasons, you have to tread lightly as a mentor, because there may be reasons why people are choosing one path or another, which have nothing to do with the actual work and everything to do with for instance, socioeconomic factors. They've got massive student loans and they see a career in academics versus a career in industry as I'm better off going into industry. People may be very fearful of getting funding with NIH funding and so forth. So it's very helpful to explore these things with the mentees, but be respectful of their privacy. So, it's kind of a fine line. So balancing the competing demands of needs and interests of mentors and mentees. What do we mean by competing demands? Well, this can include research productivity and obtaining funds, creativity and independence, and conflicts of interest, which segues into intellectual property, career preference decisions, such as we've just discussed, non-research activities, personal life, personal development, work-life balance, and personal wellness. And these are all very important, and those sort of on the bottom of the list, as I said, really should not be trivialized, because they're going to be essential to the long-term productivity and success of a scientist. So the key questions: what are the responsibilities of the mentor to every mentee, regardless of their career path? To what extent are the differing value systems of the mentor and the mentee a factor in their relationship? How might non-research interests and personal goals and obligations play into the mentee's decision of their career path? And how might the mentor draw these factors out in discussion? So, in terms of the documentation around these issues, again, I'm going to circle back to the idea of an IDP or a mentoring compact. And these documents, whatever you end up using, should include text on how the mentor and mentee are expected to communicate all sorts of issues, including a sudden change in the work plan. If the change is due to health issues, family issues, etc., the question again, circling back to what we were just talking about, to what degree should you be involved in the very personal aspects of your mentee's life? And how will they move forward from whatever the obstacles and stumbling blocks are? So we'll move then to the next case, which discusses and touches on these issues. It's called Life Changes. Your mentee's past productivity with projects and manuscripts changed over the last year as his mother was diagnosed with and ultimately died from pancreatic cancer. The mentee's mother had provided substantial support for the mentee's family, including childcare, cooking, and household management. Understandably, her illness slowed the mentee's productivity. Your mentee needs support to complete a major grant application with an upcoming deadline. So the questions we're going to open to the group are, what should you do as his mentor? To what extent should research mentors have a role in helping mentees with work-life balance? And have you as a mentor dealt with similar situations? So we'll open the lines.
So in terms of the mentor's role at this point, it's really looking out for the overall well-being of this mentee. And if that means taking a step back from research responsibilities, that'll be important. And I think it should be stressed to this mentee that unless things are settled at home and everything's in order in the personal life, performance professionally could really suffer. And if you're thinking about the long-term success of this individual, it really sounds like from this case, things need to be put aside on the research front and concentrate on what's happening at home.
Yeah, I think that's, this is an important case, and it kind of shows that even though these webinars are structured around research mentoring, we're dealing with human beings, and it's hard to separate research from other activities. So I've been on both sides of this situation as mentor and as a mentee. And I think, really when something like this happens, the research becomes secondary. It really becomes a human issue of trying to get past the crisis. And every institution has resources for dealing with these kinds of events. And the best approach, I think, is just to connect the individual, the mentee, or the mentor, whichever case, with these resources and allow them the time to process and then get back to the research when the situation improves.
I think that's a very, very good approach and a very humane approach. Should we move to the next case? So the next case is entitled Looking for Balance, and it's related. Dr. Feinstein is a 32-year-old assistant professor who joined the faculty 5 years ago and became a case scholar 2 years ago. His wife is expecting their first child, and he's requesting a 3-month parental leave from you, his mentor. He divulges to you hearing a rumor that you're considering mentoring a new case scholar this spring who apparently is a real go-getter, workaholic, who puts in 80-hour weeks, etc. And you sense from the discussion that Dr. Feinstein fears this new scholar, in combination with his growing family, will make him look as though he's not serious about his research career. So the question for all of us to discuss are, What are the main themes raised in this case study, and how would you address them as a mentor? How is maternity leave treated differently than paternity leave at your institution? And I would love to hear from everybody on the phone about this, because my experience is different at every institution. And how can the concept of workforce flexibility be translated for researchers? So we'll open the phone. I can hear somebody because somebody coughed. So I want the person who just coughed to tell me about maternity and paternity leave at their institution.
Well, I'm happy to jump in and talk about what's happening at my institution. We actually do not have a strict policy for paternity leave or maternity leave. We leave it up to the Family Medical Leave Act. Most males do not get any paternity leave. So in the last 7 years, I've had 2 children, and I've had to use vacation time and leave time to be home with my infant. It's perturbing in a way, and I think moving forward, I've tried to advocate for some more strict policies in terms of minimum time away, at least, giving us a couple weeks. And in terms of maternity leave, as a fellowship director, I've been very accommodating and giving up to 3 months paid maternity leave for my fellows, even for 1-year fellowships. I think it's so important for their overall well-being and their personal life that it's something that I personally would prioritize.
Any
those
other
are great
thoughts?
points. I think, you know, this whole field of maternity and paternity leaves is evolving rapidly. You know, I work at Wake Forest with the Office of Women's in Medicine and Science, and we've just done almost like a systematic review of what various academic centers across the country have, and the practice vary widely. But as a result of that, what we've done is we've approached our hospital leadership and basically proposed a time off that would be similar for maternity and paternity, and they're now studying it. So I think, you know, there is some hope for transformation on a kind of a institutional level, but more importantly on a kind of a more micro level. I've been very fortunate in terms of our radiology department, where we've had maximal flexibility for both fathers and mothers to take off as much as they feel is necessary. So I don't think kind of in our little microcosm it's ever been a problem, but we do hear nightmares in other departments, and that has led to some action.
Yeah, and anyone on the line want to speak? Because I'll jump in then also. So I'll share what we do at NYU. This is fairly new, but we actually have very, I think, generous maternity and paternity leave, family leave, which is, if you've been here over 5 years, three weeks of paid leave, and that can fall under FEMLA. But for the women, and then they get another 6 weeks. So women get 9 weeks of paid maternity leave and up to 3 months of leave under FEMLA, which could either be paid vacation or unpaid leave. But I want to bring up another aspect of this, which I think this case touches on. It's not just the leave, it's also the perception. Dr. Feinstein is worried about that he's not going to be perceived as as serious as the other researcher as a researcher. And that's a problem women face all the time. And so I'll share that I have 2 children, and when I went through them, my kids are now 20 and 21, so this is a while ago, and I was very conscious of the idea of the mommy track, and that's a term that may or may not still be used. But you know, I was very fearful that I would be perceived as someone on the mommy track if I didn't come right back to work after having had those babies. So I did. I didn't ever miss a meeting because it was late in the day or early in the morning. I had babysitters lined up on either side of my regular nanny's time so that I never had to leave work early to relieve the nanny. I could never not be at a meeting that I wanted or needed to be at because of my domestic obligations. I was crazy about this, but this was 20 years ago. And the question is, has it really changed? Or are we giving women, more maternity leave and so forth, but still looking at them kind of differently if they say, I can't do that grand rounds because it runs over, and, or can't do that M&M meeting because it runs over regularly and I have to, leave to get home to relieve the nanny. The perception of people on the mommy track or even, on the daddy track, do you get looked at if you take time off for paternity leave? I mean, looked at differently, looked at negatively? Are you looked at as you're not serious if you take 3 weeks or a month off?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to kind of circle back to the subject of these webinars, I mean, I think as mentors, we have an obligation to be able to to manage these types of situations humanely and appropriately. So I think it's really kind of the tone that you set as a mentor, as a department leader, or as a policy maker. And I think that tone should be that, it's really different strokes for different folks. There's not one way to be successful as a researcher or as an academician or as a scientist or as even a clinical radiologist. And we're now working in a factory making small parts, and the speed and the volume and the RVUs only capture a small percentage of what we do. So if we set a culture that recognizes what we're now calling work-life integration rather than balance, I think everybody gets the benefit. So I'm personally optimistic about it, but I think certainly there's still a way to go.
I think another problem that this case points to is that there's a perception that research should be done after clinical hours, and that you should be putting 80 hours of work in a week, 40, 50 hours clinically, and then doing all your research in weekends and nights. And I think that's the wrong message. I think that's going to lead us towards burnout. And if research is something that is prioritized by the department, it should be supported in terms of time away from clinic, more academic time, and actually putting that into the usual work hours and not demanding 80-hour weeks.
Great point. So the next section is about mentoring self-reflection. And I think reflecting on mentoring relationship is vital in terms of improving yourself as a mentor. So you should do it at regular intervals, which would mean different things to different people, depending whether you mentor, medical students or residents or fellows or junior faculty, whether you're talking about K award winners, et cetera. But the idea of kind of regular reflection is very important if you're going to improve. So I'm going to show a couple of templates potentially that you can use to help you get there. This is a mentor self-reflection template where you can see various domain on the left. So for the purposes of these webinars, research is very important, but we've also talked about expectations and feedback. We've talked about at length about effective communication. And in this session, we started to talk a little bit about issues that come out outside of the research environment, such as career development issues and psychosocial support. So what you can potentially do at the end of a mentoring session or at the end of the mentoring interval is fill out a sheet like this and actually write down, committed to writing, what were the unique challenges, what happened, how did you respond, and most importantly, in the bottom, kind of create an action plan for the upcoming session or for the upcoming year. What do you want to keep doing, what worked for you, and what do you want to try doing differently, perhaps that didn't work, and are there any resources that you can ask from your leadership or from other people that do similar jobs that can help you do your mentoring job more effectively? Here's another and a slightly simpler way to assess yourself. So this is broken down into competencies, so communication, expectations, understanding, all these things we've covered in prior webinars, addressing differences between mentors and mentees based on socioeconomic class or race or gender, etc. The thing that we spent a lot of time talking about in the last session about launching your mentees into the wild, fostering independence so they can become as independent as you are, and then what we're speaking about here, professional development. And it's basically just, again, an opportunity to write things down. What have you used in the past, and what you're going to try to do in the next year. And one last example of the same thing, this is a PDF that we gave out to you all in prior webinar, so if you haven't read it already, maybe you want to revisit it. But the reason I'm bringing it up here is it also has a self-assessment list where you can, kind of ask yourself, how am I doing as a mentor? So you have various activities that you do as a mentor, and it forces you to give an example of these. So give an example of an incident that illustrates that you acknowledge differences between you and various mentees. Give an example of how you make yourself available. Give an example of how you engage in active listening. Give an example of when you gave praise rather than criticism. And then for me, who does a lot of kind of group mentoring, these ones about the scientific community and the social community become very important, because it's a slightly different animal when you mentor a group as opposed to mentoring an individual. And there's all sorts of complexities and issues that come up. And then in the next column, after you give that example, again, the whole purpose of this is to enable self-reflection. You can make a short list, of how could you do it better, right? So for me, in group mentoring, it's always a struggle on how to engage all members of the group, so people don't feel like there's a free rider, right? That they don't feel like, they're working harder than somebody else in the group, and it's unfair. So that is that is tricky, but all of these things are potentially tricky, and there's potentially room for improvement. But unless you kind of admit to yourself that there is room for improvement, it's going to be hard to do something about it. So the resources, right? So we've talked in prior webinars about resources available to both mentors and mentees. And here we'd like to emphasize three that are really kind of unavoidable if you're going to mentor. And these are important for both mentees and for mentors. So looking at, Georgiana already mentioned public speaking and presentation skills, which is important, but writing skills are arguably even more important, because all of you, mentees, mentors, etc., are going to write grants, are going to write papers, and the better you are at expressing your ideas in a written form, the easier it's going to be to do your job. Time management tips, the same kind of concept. It doesn't matter how advanced you are in your career, whether you're just starting out or you're kind of sundowning. Either way, time management skills are vital. The one I just learned a few weeks ago was called swallowing a frog, and it comes from Mark Twain's advice on how to manage time. And the idea is, if you do something that's the most unpleasant or the most difficult early in the day, then everything else will be that much easier. Whereas if you start with your easiest task in the morning, you're going to get that dopamine rush from having accomplished something, and you may not want to move on and accomplish the more difficult task. So try that, and maybe it'll work for you. It seemed to have worked for me recently. And lastly is funding opportunities. As Christoph mentioned, no one or not too many chairs are excited about you doing research for free. So you need to be able to get your research paid for, and there may be opportunities to do that in the mentoring space as well. So here's an example of faculty development resources from NYU that Georgianne shared, and this comes from the Harvard Business School, and you can actually take these little mini tutorials, if you will, that can help you with various parts of mentoring. And a lot of institutions have similar resources, and I think I've said this on prior webinars, but one of the biggest mistakes in my mind that radiologists in particular make is that they do not reach out and connect with other institutional resources that all other researchers from cardiology to surgery are using. So make connections within your research environment, and you may already have resources that can help you become a better mentor. And with regard to funding, again, there are funding mechanisms, of course, for mentees, such as K Awards and Career Development Awards, but some of these awards also pay for mentors. So keep that in mind when you help your mentees prepare awards. Keep that in mind as a possibility for yourself, as if you decide to expand your mentoring portfolio, because money talks, and being able to obtain money for mentoring is part of what we're all trying to do. And I'm just going to kind of promote the Radiology Research Alliance grant writing videos that we just posted. So if you go on our website, right under the tab that summarizes our webinars that we're doing, there's another tab that's called Online Grant Writing Series, and there are 6 half-hour videos that are really well done, and they're put together by the group at Emory. So something like this may be useful to you as a mentor. It may be useful to you to share with your mentees, and there's similar resources from all sorts of different groups. There are grant writing workshops at RSNA and other societies. So take advantage of these. And more importantly, share these types of resources with your mentees. So let me stop for a few minutes here and see if anybody has any questions or comments.
So Jen has to do it. Right.
So we can't specifically like
Does anybody have any questions or comments?
They can leave Jen a note.
Yeah. Let's see how it works.
Oh, okay.
Carrie, we're getting some extra noise, so I'm going to move on. You can silence. So the final thoughts are, like any other type of relationship in a person's life, the relationship between mentor and mentee requires intentional effort. So this reflecting about the relationship will really strengthen it. And the other emphasis is clear communication. So intentional effort and clear communication will help you be healthy and successful in your mentor and mentee relationship. And this quote comes from the PDF that we distributed prior to this webinar on the 10 simple rules for mentor-mentee expectation document. So in these webinars, we try to promote your reflection, but really the most important piece is the now what piece. So how are you going to change your approach to mentoring as a result of watching these webinars? If you're interested in more in-depth approach, please join us for the workshop. Send me an email, and we will do more case discussions and more sharing about how to make ourselves better as mentors. I want to acknowledge again Anita and Deb, who helped me survive the CTSI Academy that I did at Wake Forest, and then helped prepare the materials for these webinars.